And we're so happy to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here as well.
Happy, happy to welcome Marilyn Childress here, Childress, to talk about your military service and to talk about your story in general, because we're not just interested in what you did during your time in the military.
Okay.
We're interested in you as a person, from childhood up until now. Historians are kind of interested in that context,
Right.
in addition to what happened on the ground.
Right.
So we find everything fascinating.
Well, that's cool.
And somebody who will be researching your story down the road is going to find something in your story that they connect to. So can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up?
I grew up in South Knoxville in the 50s. I was born in 1952. So it's quite a while ago. And I just turned 70 6 months ago. So it's been a long journey. And it was, a lot of different time then. The families that we lived in, it was born in the Lonsdale area. But after the war, they were expanding and having houses available. My family, my dad could buy a house over in South Knoxville, and it was on Hackman Street, and all these houses were similar, and all the families were about the same age. And we all grew up, and me and one other girl were the only girls on this street of about 15 boys. So I grew up, and back then you stayed outside. There wasn't computers, there wasn't much even on TV. You only had 3 channels, and sometimes you only had 2. So we spent most of our time in the summertime, definitely playing outside. We rode our bicycles all over South Knoxville, and fortunately for us, there wasn't that worriedness of us getting hurt or by predators or anything. And we just went everywhere. And even as my family, my dad would work for KUB, didn't have a lot of money, and I was a Girl Scout, but I couldn't afford to go to camp. So there was a day camp out where Imes is now. It's Girl Scout camp, and I would ride my bicycle there during the summertime. So Girl Scouts, I was really involved in Girl Scouts from the 2nd grade all the way through sophomore year in college, which I think helped formulate a lot of my goals and things I do today. And again, growing up in the 50s, I was very athletic, but there wasn't a lot of opportunities for girls when I was growing up, especially like today. And they wouldn't let you play on the boys' baseball team or play football. I was a really good football player. I actually had grown quite fast. And so everybody, when we were playing our neighborhood football games, I was always one of the first chosen, because at 10 years of age, I was 5'6" and taller than most everybody. And so we played in the creeks, and we played all kinds of stuff, and we just had a really good childhood. And then we moved from Hackman Street when I was a sophomore, in the 6th grade, to up on Hillwood Avenue, which has now been taken down. But we got to have a 6-acre place in the middle of the city, up on a hill overlooking the Tennessee River. And me and my 2 brothers, we just had a great time up there, and all our friends wanted to come up there. We even had a nature trail on our own yard, and it was up on a hill. So in the wintertime, there was a pipeline company had come in to go connect the big old tank that was near the river. So on the side was a straight hill down through there. So in the wintertime, when it snowed, we used that as, you go up like this, and we just had a great time growing up. And so from there, and we lived there through my high school.
And you mentioned your dad worked for KUB.
Yeah.
And you have 2 brothers. Any other siblings?
No, it's just my 2 brothers. I'm the middle one.
So you grew up on a street with a lot of boys, and then inside of a house.
Yeah, with two boys, and all my cousins that are my age. My dad was the baby of 11, and so there's a lot of cousins, and there's only like 4 out of all those cousins. Out of 20-something cousins, there's only 3 or 4 of us that are girls. So, and at my age, I was the only one. All those other were boys. So I had to learn how to be able to compete with the boys and stuff. And to be honest, that's really helped me I think throughout my life, because and I was in the Navy. When I was in the Navy, I think it was less than 2% were women at the time, between in the 70s, early 70s. And then when I got out of the Navy and I finished college, I actually helped run a machine shop, which is again another male dominated industry. So, and so I think, that kind of helped formulate me being able to communicate, not be worried. I mean, things, I couldn't be bullied too much by some of the guys, because I'd always bully back when I was younger. So they didn't scare me. And, that happened a number of times while I was in the Navy, trying to intimidate me, and I wouldn't let them intimidate me. So,
any family members in the military?
my dad was in the Navy, and that's one reason I chose the Navy. And another reason, I'm a pre-Title IX. And so while, again, I was talking about being athletic. And so when I was in high school, there weren't very many sports. And in that time frame, Knoxville, I had Knoxville City Schools and Knox County Schools were two separate entities. And so Knox County Schools would have basketball and track for every year. Sometimes they in the county, and I was in the city, but in the county, they maybe have one other sport. And in the city, they had volleyball and track every year. One time, a couple times they had swimming. One time they had tennis. Well, I did track, and I played volleyball. And because those were the two main sports, but I never got to play basketball because it wasn't part of the school thing. And there was some recreational basketball that I played a little bit, but because we weren't involved in the school system, I was much more involved in volleyball. There was a gentleman named Jim West that came to Knoxville when I was in the 7th grade, and he had moved here from California, and he wanted to get the volleyball more involved here and play like they do in California. So he went around to the different high schools that were playing volleyball and selected some all-stars, and I was one of them. And so from the time of about the mid-age of 7th grade until I was about 25, I played very high-level competitive volleyball. And so when I graduated from college, I was recruited by Joe Hobson, who happened to be, do you want to turn my phone off, or if you know how to do that, or give it to me and I'll turn it off?
If you don't mind,
Yeah, I'll just turn the sound down. Sorry about that. I
No worries.
So anyway, I was playing very competitive, and my dad was very supportive of he would have been a great Title IX dad, because he would take us all the other places. When we went to tournaments, I went to Cincinnati, and between the 7th and 9th grade, and through until we could drive ourselves. And but anyway, I got recruited to play at UT for the first 2 years, and again, pre-Title IX, and no support whatsoever, like the athletes, especially like they get now.
So you didn't get a scholarship to UT?
Oh no, I mean, there was no scholarships. There was none of the academic support that athletes get now. There was none of that, And in my second year, our team actually won the South region of the DGWS, which was called the Division of Girls and Women's Sports. That was the national organization organizing college sports and high school sports. And we went to the national tournament, which is a interesting story, because we used, when we went to travel on the weekends to play our our tournaments, we would have to take pennies with us because we only had one set of uniforms. So, and then also we had a van, and we had to drive our own cars. Sometimes we could all ride in some, but so when we went to the national tournament, we had to have 2 sets of uniforms. So we had to borrow it from the basketball team, so their jerseys, so that we'd have 2 sets of uniforms at the thing. And we got paid 10 cents a mile to drive our own vehicle to and it was in Miami. It was at Miami-Dade Junior College. It was an eye-opener for some of us, because we were playing against teams that were from California and in the Midwest and stuff that had played volleyball. at the time we called it power volleyball because it was so much different than here. And we had just really started playing, some of us had only been playing it for 5 or 6 years. And so we were tops in this area, but still not anywhere near so it was a great tournament. And at the time also I played with a group. Folk music was a big. Peter, Paul, and Mary were one of my favorite groups, and me and my best friend in high school, Barbara Mott, we had a little group, and this other girl joined us, and we called ourselves the Hourglass, and we actually won one of the contest.
Did you sing?
Yes, I sang. Yeah.
Okay.
And we won on Cass Walker talent show on their TV show, and my mom and dad gave me a brand new guitar after that show. But so I sang at the tournament, and in front of all these 500 people, and it was kind of scary. It's the first time I'd ever sang in front of that many folks, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. But at the same time, I was kind of struggling a little bit. I was a pre-med student, and I was kind of struggling. I'd gone from my high school senior class was only 170 people, and then I come to UT, and I'm not. My academics wasn't the top part, but I still felt like I could become a doctor. But
what made you want to become a doctor?
my mom. Partly, but my mom worked for a doctor in the secretary's office, and I just felt that I wanted to help people, and so I felt that was the way to do it. And I actually wanted to be a veterinarian, but at the time the vet school wasn't here, so you had to be had to go out of state, and I knew there's no way I could compete with that. And so
you mentioned your dad was in the Navy. Was he in World War II?
Yes, he was in World War II, and he was actually in the Pacific, and it's very interesting. And I think you may have seen this when y'all talked to some World War IIs or any. Daddy always told me all the good stuff while he was in the service, like what happened. How much fun he came and visited me when I was at Great Lakes, and we talked about all the good times he had because he went to boot camp in his A school there. Daddy was a signalman. And then he said he went from Great Lakes to San Diego when he got assigned to the Cabrera. And he had the first day he was there, they had leaves, and he saw all these guys taking their peacoats. Now it was 80 something degrees, right? And he couldn't figure out, because he'd been in Great Lakes, right? He said, there's no way I'm carrying that peacoat with me. Well, he said at 10 o'clock at night, he said or 9 o'clock at night, he was freezing to death because he wasn't used to the desert kind of temperature. And he said he never made that mistake ever again. And he also talked about being on the ship, and occasionally the admiral of the fleet would be on his ship because he was on an LST. And so the admiral would be, and so the admiral flag would be on there a lot. So he talked about how great that was and everything. But when he turned 85 or 84, he didn't share this with me, but with one of my cousins, because he had gotten sick. And he told him the story about one time he was in the crow's nest signaling, and the admiral was on their ship. So, of course, the admiral flag's on that ship, right? The kamikaze was headed straight towards him, and one of the destroyers blew the plane out of the air. But he said if that destroyer had missed, it would have hit him. And that's the first time he ever talked about any major. I mean, he talked about sometimes having to shoot his guns, planes coming over, but nothing of that closeness of being hurt during the war. And I thought, he told me, I know that there must be many, many other men that were in World War II. And I've heard since then a number of friends of mine whose dads were in World War II that said the same thing, that they never talked about the problems they had back then,
And so you grew up, and your dad's telling you some stories about World War II, but some of the good stuff.
All the good stuff.
And
yeah.
so you that helped you think about the Navy.
Yeah.
And you're in Girl Scouts, and you're also a student athlete and involved pretty seriously in these teams.
Yes. Yeah.
Organized sports.
They organized. Yeah. And the other thing is that in my high school, I was involved in a lot of service organizations like Y Teams and starts with the O, anyway, I was like 2 or 3 different organizations, service organizations that I was really highly involved in as well. And I, like again, I was in Girl Scouts all the way through college. So
That might have shaped you and
absolutely. And
got you on track towards the military.
and also I was in band.
Okay.
So I was in band from 5th grade until I graduated, and I played French horn, and I wasn't great, but I was decent enough that the band director wanted me to be in. So my high school was 7th. It was South High School, 7th through 12th. And so as a 7th grader, I was advanced to be in the high school band. And so, and the directors we had, I had 3 volunteers. They were all very good, but I enjoyed the uniforms. I enjoyed the marching and all that kind of thing. I really enjoyed it. And the main reason when I decided I should go in the military, because I was having trouble with my classes. I mean, I wasn't failing, but it wasn't what I wanted it to
This is
be.
why you're at UT.
As well as UT,
Playing volleyball,
yeah,
pre-med,
pre-med,
you decide
and I want to
go.
go in the Navy. And my mom and dad had divorced, and so my dad was supposed to pay for it, everything, but he was still not financially rich or anything. And I thought, well, if I go in the Navy, I can get the GI Bill, and I can finish up my college degree and not be a burden on my dad's financial stuff. So that's one of the reasons why I went. And of course, I'd heard all the good things about all the traditions that Navy have. And
Did you go into a recruiter's office?
I did. Yeah.
Here in Knoxville?
You're here in Knoxville. Yeah. And they gave you an exam. And of course, they said I could do anything I wanted to. Well, I chose to be a hospital foreman. And while I was at the time, they had women on the hospital ships, the sanctuary. And that was my goal, was I could be on a ship as a hospital foreman. And then while I was in boot camp, there was some women that had got pregnant on the sanctuary. And so they changed all that, because it all the women's fault that they got pregnant. Not so that they did away with that. And also during that period of time, women were not allowed to be in country and of any combat issues. And very, very few women were even sent overseas. They were all stayed in the United States. It's in the Navy anyway. I know some Marines got to go to Okinawa and some other places in a supporting role, but not in country where there's fighting going on. So as a corpsman,
Were there other women with you in the cohort right when you started in the military to kind of?
Well, a friend of mine I see when I graduated from high school and I got a job at the Girl Scout camp I was actually a lifeguard and a canoe instructor, and a woman that had just gotten out of the Navy was also a counselor there. So I got to talk to her about her experience in it, and she had gotten out because she didn't see much what she was going to do with it, and then she actually ended up going back in and retiring. So I did talk to her quite a bit about it, and her boot camp was at Bainbridge, Maryland, and my boot camp I was in the 4th week of women being at Orlando. So that was quite interesting, because they really didn't know what to do with it. So there was 2 companies per week, and my company was company 8. And the people down there really still were trying to figure out how they're going to incorporate women at this training center where it had been men the whole time. And so a lot of things they were still learning while we were there for 10 weeks, and a few things they were learning. But that was a very opening for me personally. I had been kind of a leader, but not one of the top persons that was in there. But somehow I got chosen because I had 2 years of college, I believe. I got chosen as the recruit 2 petty officer. And so I was in charge of all these girls, and it was, when one girl got in trouble, then I got in trouble. And so if they got screamed at, I got screamed at the same time. And by the end of boot camp, my company commander was talking about what a great job that I had done, and what a great job, even though our company never won flags or anything, because we were always mischief, but we had a good time. But we learned a lot, that kind of stuff. But I used some of my band stuff while I was there to make our marching much more fun. And while we're having to stand waiting to go someplace, we would do some of the maneuvers that I had learned in band. And the girls absolutely bought into it. And so they reacted much better than just standing there and not doing anything. And so it was in August and September when we were there. So if the black flag was flying, you couldn't go marching. And so, but you always march to chow, to classes and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes we would doing maneuvers, going to stuff, and everybody kind of thought it was pretty cool actually. But they finally made us quit doing it. the higher ups and stuff.
You mentioned that your friend had gotten out of the military because you didn't see a career in that.
Right. She was also a hospital foreman and operating room.
Did you have the same sort of feelings when they told you that
Yes,
you wouldn't be able to go to these shows?
Yeah. I was very, very disappointed. But I got even more disappointed after I went into. She had already been an operating room technician out before she joined, so she didn't even have to go to course school or anything. They just went ahead and immediately assigned her to a hospital. I think it was in Jacksonville, but I had to go to course school, and then I had to go to operating room technician school. Course school was 3 months. Operating room school was 6 months, and I was stationed at Great Lakes. And I got to work after course school. I worked for 3 months, almost 3 months on the wards. I got some experience working on a ward, and then operating room school started. Well, there was only 13 of us in this class, and of course, I was the only female. And when we graduated, 11 of the men got stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina, be attached to a Marine Corps unit that would be going to Vietnam. Now, at the time, it didn't dawn on me, but at the time, actually, a lot of the units were being prepped to go to Vietnam, and so I don't know how many of those guys actually went, but I always felt I betrayed my teammates because I got stationed at NAS Glencoe, Georgia, at a dispensary instead of a unit headed to Vietnam, and I felt so that it wasn't fair.
Even though it wasn't your fault.
It wasn't.
Even though you had no control.
Absolutely.
You still felt like you were.
Yes, absolutely, because they were heading to combat, and only reason I didn't go to Cherry Point, North Carolina, was because I was female. I was told that. And the reason I got stationed at NAS Glencoe, Georgia, was because it was a dispensary there, as opposed to a hospital or just a doctor's office. Because it's the same billet kind of thing that the men were getting stationed at. So if there hadn't been a need for all, that's why only 11 went on. The other guy, I got sent to Okinawa, to a dispensary in Okinawa. So I couldn't even go to Okinawa to be at a dispensary.
So you probably thought, what am I doing here? What kind of future? And
right.
Was that the start of the end for you? Did you say, well, okay, well, I'm just going to finish this out?
Well, a little bit, but not truly, because I was still it was only a year in there, and I still had 2 years left. But I always felt guilty in that I betrayed my teammates. And again, that comes back to my sports upbringing, and a team is a team. And I know the guys were all mad because their recruiters had not told them that every third billet was going to Vietnam. Every third class of operating room technicians. Every Marine Corps unit not only has to have corpsmen attached to it, but they have to have operating room technician. And that's because we're trained to do much more kind of things. Actually, I got to sew some people up at the dispensary that were enlisted that just the regular foreman couldn't do. So anyway, that was interesting. But while I was at I think I was in core school. They had a music contest, and I ended up winning second over the whole base. And
Singing, playing guitar.
singing and playing guitar. I sang Scotch and soda is what I sang. And the guy that's in charge of the band there on the boot camp side approached me and wanted, because they didn't have many women, and wanted me to join, and knew, and found out I played French horn and I could sing and all that kind of stuff. But the kicker was, I had to sign up for 6 more months because I was changing rates, and that's where nope, I'm not staying in. Because if I had thought about staying in, that would have been a really good duty, being on the musician rate. But I had decided right then and there not to continue, and I was still just going to get my GI Bill and go back to school. And
is that what you did? You took your GI Bill and came back to UT?
Oh yeah. I have a master's degree. So anyway, that's what happened in boot camp, and then it was quite interesting duty at NAS Glencoe, because again I was the only female foreman for this whole base. and partly is because they were closing. This base is about 50 miles north of Kings Bay submarine base, and so it was a support for the submarines going in and out, because it was the pilots going, and they had some training there, as well as training some ground crew advanced training there. So there were women on the base, it just they weren't foremen, and there was a number of retirees around that place. And so every time a female came in after hours, I was on call. In fact, they finally moved me, as it was an old World War II dispensary, so they actually had a ward on the back and some private rooms, and I got moved into one of those private rooms, so I wouldn't have to worry about trying to get there. So so that was kind of interesting. Now they had civilian nurses for the dependents on during the day, but after hours, if there was a female, I had to take care of them. And we did everything there. We did X-rays, pharmacy, lab work. So I learned how to do all of that while I was there. I enjoyed it in there, except for the fact that it was so much time. I was at E5 and I was working about 80 hours a week, which most E5s don't work 30 hours a week, which is, but so anyway, but the other thing that's interesting about there, since we're talking about Tennesseans, as I said, the base was closing down, and so they near the last 3 or 4 months, they closed the BOQ, that's the officers' quarters, down, but they had this pool table in, and the guy that's in charge of all the supplies and all the facilities and stuff, he happened to be from Kingston, Tennessee. And so I talked to him and I said, hey, what are y'all going to do with that pool table? He said, I guess it's just going to sit there. And I said, well, if I can get permission from our MO and get some guys to move it, can we move it to the dispensary? Because we had all this time, a lot of times, just standing around not doing anything. So I asked the MO. He said, yeah, that'd be fun. So we took this old World War II, y'all seen the ambulances in MASH. That's the kind of ambulances that we had. So we drove one of those down to the EOQ, and the guys loaded up this pool table, and we brought it back. And in the afternoons, all of us, including the MO guy, our medical officer, the guy in charge of everything, we back there playing pool till waiting on patients to come in. that was pretty cool. So it's quite really laid back and everything, because of at least the last 4 or 5 months that I was stationed there. And then I got stationed at I got to go see the world because I went to Memphis. I got to do this NAS Millington, and I was actually got to work in the operating room. And again, I was the only female foreman. There's nurses there, but I was in charge of the only room that a woman can be in charge of is the OBGYN room, which it's one of the most boring things, except when you're bringing babies in the world. There's nothing better than doing that. But I would have preferred working orthopedics, because there's a lot more drilling and holding. And that's where I got out, was from Memphis.
Did you feel during your time in the military, as one of the few women, that was extra motivation for you did you kind of handle a lot of that yourself, or did you lean on others?
I handled it mostly on myself because there wasn't anybody really to go to.
Did you write home?
Just family and friends, yeah. But and also my friend Jamie, who was the lady I was telling you about, she had already actually re-upped and became a recruiter, and so she put in for me to come in. So I got 2 weeks of duty to come up here in Knoxville and be a recruiter for a couple of weeks, and then while I was in Memphis, there was a guy there that had a USVBA volleyball team, and he was a retired captain from the Navy, and so he was retired there, and so again, our team we won the Southeast region to go to the USVBA national tournament, which was 1975 May, and it was in Reno, Nevada, and so during that time and still today, some men get to join a service, and all they do the whole 4 years they're in there, or ever how long, is to play sports. They're on their sports team. And I know now there are some women's teams, they do the same thing, but it's not quite the same. But even still, they have them now. Well, when I was in, they didn't have such a thing. And so there was the hospital side of Millington and the general base side. Well, on the general base side, because that's where we practice volleyball, I saw these guys that play basketball and play baseball and this stuff and boxing and everything. So when I got the opportunity, we're going to the national tournament, we're going to be gone for 10 days because we were driving ourselves up there. They were going to make me take my own personal leave. So I went to the CEO of the base and I said, I'm representing the Navy at a national tournament. And I said, I don't think I should have to take my own personal leave. And so he gave me special duty. And when I went to try to, I don't think it's recorded anywhere, but I didn't have to take my leave. But anyway, I might be one of the first women. I don't know. There might be some other, but one of the very first women that got special leave to go play sports while I was in the Navy. So.
And you felt that yourself at the time that it was special.
Oh yeah. So so that was interesting, and I played against Flo Hyman, who is, if anybody, people that know volleyball know that she was probably one of the greatest volleyball players ever played, and we played against the junior Olympic team at the time, who turned out to be the 1984 Olympic team. It had Debbie Green and all those players that won a gold medal. Well, I actually played against them when they were in high school. And we didn't win. Don't get me wrong. We didn't win. We didn't even get close to winning, especially playing against Flo Hyman and her team from California. But I was across the net. She was on this side of the net, and I was on this side of the net. And she spiked it on me, baby. That was pretty cool. And the same experience I had with soccer. I played against Michelle Akers in an indoor tournament when she was in college, and she scored 10 goals on me in a 20-minute period of time. But I played against her. So
I was going to ask you about that, Marilyn, because up to this point you haven't mentioned soccer.
Well, because I didn't get it.
All these other sports that you were interested in. Do you think that your experience in the military with sports and having to get this special exemption to be able to travel to this tournament influenced you after your military service in the push that you made for sports?
Oh, absolutely. And because, again, free Title IX. So when I got out and I got finished with school, and I came back and I got my, I tried to be a vet student, and many people don't realize how hard it is to get into vet school. It's much harder to get in vet school than it is medical school. There's only 55 vet schools, and there's 320 something medical schools. And I just still didn't have the academics to get into vet school, but I made myself, after I graduated, and I was working, I got a research assistance when I came back. Because of my military experience being able to operate, there was a doctor here that was doing research on cardiac arrest, and he liked the fact that I could help him do surgery on the animals that we were working on. And so I got this, and so I had some insight, but I still just couldn't get my academics high enough. the fact that it was now the first school was open in '79. That's when I graduated with my master's, my undergraduate degree. But I made the point of, and I got encouragement from my professors at UT to stay and get my master's degree. And so I was probably the very first joint animal science department and vet school master's program, and it was in toxicology. My major professor was Gerald Bratton, and we were researching lead poisoning in dairy cows. And the reason he was doing that was because there was not a good assay for large animals that had lead poisoning. That by the time you got your whole blood back, if it's acute lead poisoning, they were dead. So he was taking some things from humans, such as zinc protoporphyrin, which is what they use for kids. You just drop the blood, put it in the thing, it tells you whether they've got lead poisoning or not. So we were trying to do all the baselines for that. And so that my master's degree is in that realm. And
While you're finishing your master's, are you still in sports?
actually, no, because I decided the reason I didn't, because first off, I hindsight, I could have probably gone and tried out for the volleyball team, but because they all were scholarship kids, I didn't think that they would accept me. But the other thing is I wanted to concentrate on my studies, and I wanted to make sure I got done within the time frame of my GI Bill kind of situation. And but I had enough so I had my GI Bill all the way through my master's degree. So
then what got you back into sports?
Well,
especially in the soccer.
Well, so the story about that is, when I graduated, I had offers to go and work in research labs across the country. And when I was stationed at Great Lakes, I had made a promise to myself I'd never live north of Knoxville because it was so cold I couldn't stand it. And I had some offers in Michigan and a couple other places. And then my major professor had gotten a job to go back to Texas A&M and wanted me to go there. And then my mom and her husband had started a company in Atlanta, Georgia. And I decided I didn't want to go. And plus, at the time, all this research with lead poisoning, a lot of the stuff was cancer causing things. And I had just made the decision that maybe I didn't want to stay in research. I loved it, but and the offers weren't great money wise. It wasn't, even though you had a master's degree, you weren't getting paid a whole lot. And so my mom's needed some help because their business was growing. And I thought, well, what I can do is go down there, work a few years, get some business experience. And I could end up maybe go back to school and get industrial hygienist or go sell veterinary supplies or go sell surgical supplies, whatever. But having that medical, that business experience, I thought was neat. Well, when I got there, make a long story short, I ended up doing payroll, and then starting with payroll, and then I ended up being the general manager of a company that's 60 employees, and we had 2 shifts, and I love the business aspect of it. I didn't realize how much I really enjoyed it. I'm, as an ag major, I mean, y'all are history majors, but ag majors you have to take business courses anyway. So I had some business experience. I have to explain that. Well, you have a degree in animal science. How do you have to? Well, all animal science is just taking a business and growing animals with it. And you still have to know what the costs are and all that other stuff. So I had some great background from my college days on it, and it just kind of fit in. And again, being a leader, I had finally become a natural leader, and I like to be in charge. And so I stayed there, right? So after I had moved down there, a friend of mine had already moved to Atlanta, and she came to me and said, "Well, I started playing soccer while I was here," and she said, "You want to come play?" And I was 30 when I moved to Atlanta, and I said, or almost 30, and I said, I don't really think I want to go running up and down the field, And she said, "Hey, we need a goalkeeper." Well, guess what? I was a setter. Setters and goalkeeper skills are pretty much the same. So at age 30, I started playing soccer. And again, I saw some discrepancies. The women teams always got the last dibs on fields and referees and all and equipment and everything. So there was these a couple little small leagues. And so I told some of the women that had been doing it, I said, we need to form one big, huge league. So have the same size as the men's league. So we have the same voice. So I got that started. And then I ended up becoming president of the Georgia Amateur Soccer Association, which made me go to national events and U.S. Soccer Board of Directors. And I was at the meeting when our representative from the IOC made the report. And this was in 1991 that Atlanta Organizing Committee and the IOC and FIFA had decided women's soccer would not be part of the 96 games. Well, I was really pissed because I lived in Atlanta and I wanted it to be there. And so I went to her after that. I said, is it completely a dead issue? And she said, no, there's another little wide thing there. And so I got going, and that's another whole hour's worth of story that maybe at some point in time, but I had to convince the IOC, the FIFA, and the Atlanta Organizing Committee to allow women's soccer to be in the Olympics. I went all over the country. I got the U.S. Congress to pass a resolution that said, both in the House, a joint resolution, that the will of the people want women's soccer to be part of the 96 Olympics, short version. And so because of the first part to be in the Olympics, you have to have a World Cup. Well, the World Cup was in 91. And so in 92, they had their first women's symposium about what they always after a World Cup. And I was the U.S. representative to this event. And so I took a parchment copy of this resolution to Zach Blatter, who was the executive general at the time, and had a private audience with him and presented him this and said, the will of the people, the U.S. Congress passed this resolution that women's soccer should be part of the Olympics, right? Well, the next day at one of the meetings, he gets up and he said he wanted to congratulate and thank Miss Marilyn Childress, how they international law calls you Miss and all that kind of stuff. And he said, I want you all to do what she's done. She's passed a law in the United States that women's soccer was in the Olympics. I didn't explain to him a resolution's not a law. I really didn't follow the details of whether it's a law or not a law. And so, make a long story short, I held a couple of games in Atlanta because one of the things Atlanta Organizing Committee kept saying was, nobody wants to watch women's soccer. Well, the first game I had there, we had 5,800 people there, which was the largest that ever seen a women's game. And the other thing is, I'm a big networker. I'm a big networker. And one of my teammates' husband was the consulate general for Philippines in Atlanta. And so she said, I'm going to get him to host a formal consulate dinner because we were bringing the U.S. team was going to be there in Germany. And then another friend of mine who actually is a graduate of the University of Tennessee and was student president in the 1970, I believe, his name's Charles Huddleston. He was good friends with Walter Young, who was the brother of Andrew. He said, I'll get Walter to make sure Andrew's at this dinner. And so we sat Andrew right in between all these women. And he got to talking to him, and he said that he remembers having similar conversations with Teresa Edwards, which is a big Georgia basketball player. He said, I will see what I can do to make sure women's soccer in the Olympics. And sure enough, we had women's soccer in the Olympics, and poor old ACOG, but we only had 76,477 at the final. So I guess that's nobody wanting to watch women's soccer.
That's great.
Yeah, and the main reason I did that was I was a big Title IX advocate when I started after I got out of college, because I wanted to make it easier for girls to get education because I saw what it did for me. And so I got involved with some groups down there. I helped form another group called Georgia Women's Intersport Network with a lady named Betty James, who started the Women's Basketball Coaches Association. And so I also got some junior high school equity bills passed in the state of Georgia. And so, but the main reason I was after soccer, when we were looking at Title IX issues, the universities were only adding Olympic sports. So soccer not being an Olympic sport, they could get away with not adding it. And so in this 1992-ish, I think, I looked up, there was like only 60 something colleges and universities that had women's soccer programs with scholarships. Today there's over 1,600. And so I feel that the impact for women, because women got in Olympics, all those girls got some education over it. That's one of the proudest things I think I've done, is to help them get educated, you know.
Well, close us out, Marilyn, and talk to us about the Veterans Heritage Site Foundation and when you got involved with them and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so when I moved back to Knoxville after my company closed, and I saw this thing on TV about a girl wanting to change Sharps Ridge into Sharps Ridge Veterans Park, because that's what it originally went. So I went to the meeting, and then she and I connected, and we decided that we needed to have an actual foundation for what we wanted to do. So we formed, this was 2016. So we formed Veterans Heritage Site Foundation in the premise to protect parks and cemeteries and monuments and burials, marked and unmarked. And so we got doing that, and we got the city to change the name of Veterans, Sharps Ridge to Veterans Memorial Park as it is now. And then we also worked with getting it all cleaned up so families could go up there and use it. If you've never been to Sharps Ridge, you should go. It's a wonderful place. And so from that point on, then I got involved with the Legacy Parks came to me and wanted me to help with the new park. And also during that time, I got involved with the Wreaths Across America. And so I was helping at the National Cemetery in 2019. And noticed that I was just thinking, this is a national park. Well, prior to that, in November, I had gone with this guy that is a descendant of families in Cates Cove, and on Veterans Day, he would be placing flags. And I asked him then about, do you do wreaths? And he said, no, I've only done flags for Memorial Day and here. And I said, well, do you have a list of the other veterans in the rest of the park? And he said, no, I really only care about Cates Cove. And that makes sense because that's where his family's from. And it's such a big park. And so I was thinking, well, something ought to be done about that. So anyway, and then I started, while I was putting wreaths in the National Cemetery, it dawned on me, those veterans buried in the park, what's the difference between the two? I mean, they're in a national cemetery, and these guys are in a national park. To me, it's the same difference, right? And so I happened to go to a luncheon in January of 2020, and a guy named Joe Emmerich, who was talking about Sam Houston. And afterwards, I asked him, because part of his credentials is he's on the advisory board for the National Park System, United States Park System. And I asked him, I said, do you know if there's a list of all the veterans buried in the park? And he said, well, I don't know. I'll get back with you. Well, a couple of weeks later, he calls and says, no, there is not a list. He said, but they say they'll start working on it. So 6 months later, we had a list of 166. As of today, we have a list of 239 veterans buried in the park. They're in all 5 counties. Some of them we have to hike to. We have to cross Lake Fontana, hike another 7.5 miles to get up to a cemetery where there's 7 guys buried. And so these guys have not, many of them, almost all of them have never been recognized since the park was formed, except for family members. Now the public knows, knows that these guys are there, and they walk right by them. I can guarantee you there's been thousands and thousands of people have walked right by a Revolutionary War veteran and not even recognized that he was a Revolutionary War veteran. If you've been to Primitive Baptist Church, William Hamby is buried right there, and he's a Revolutionary War veteran. Now, the other Revolutionary War veteran, probably not so many people have walked by him. It's Henry Bohannon. He's in Plymouth Cemetery. He happens to be my patriot, so he's my 5th great grandfather. But it's just been an honor for us to recognize these guys, to know for sure that from this point on, even if I'm not involved, the park will try to make sure they're recognized. Other folks are going to try to make sure, because they're now part of the Wreaths Across America national program. And this past year, this past January, December, I mean, I got the Girl Scouts involved, and we started recognizing all the Revolutionary War veterans buried in Blount County. And there's 120 of them, and we went to 20 something sites to recognize those. But the girls have to go fill out a form about that patriot. They have to go do research to find out all this stuff. So it's part of the Honor, Remember, and Teach program of the Reach Across America, but mainly in East Tennessee. I grew up here. I love East Tennessee. I came back from Atlanta to live here. But we all think of Civil War, and we never think of our Revolutionary War patriots that actually settled this area, and also the War of 1812 guys. And so that's kind of been my project, and I'm getting ready to, I'm working with the DR. We're going to try to expand this across the state, that all the Revolutionary War veterans, and I know some of them are already being recognized, but with this program with the Girl Scouts, and we add it to the Boy Scouts and stuff, so these young kids have some reasons to be able to recognize our history, and that's what I'm so excited about that. So, and we've expanded. If anybody calls up and says, "Hey, I got my great grandfather was in World War I, can we get a wreath?" I said, "Sure. You just got to let me know." So, and I said, when it's ready, you can come pick it up and take it there. So, and we're the only group right now that is doing that on a consistent basis.
Well, you've led an awesome life of service, Marilyn. Thank you for your service in a lot of different capacities, making this country a
Well,
better place.
thank you.
And Knoxville.
I don't ever think of it that way. I see something that needs to be done, and I just go do it. You know, if I have the capability of doing it. And one of the things that I spoke at the Pellissippi Veterans graduation, and I told those people, I said, I know y'all have plans. I said, but if that plan doesn't work out, that doesn't mean you're going to not be successful, because you can always find something to do. And I said, because my plan was to be a veterinarian, and I'm not a veterinarian, but I feel like I've made a contribution to life, and so you just have to have that kind of attitude.
Well, we sure have made a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you guys, and thank you very, very much.